what's our agenda like for learning team meetings?
I know. I don't know. Like, I think we should figure that out.
First agenda is to set the agenda.
Pretty much. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what I meant by introductions, but yes, I set the agenda sounds more appropriate. So we all know each other, right? Joe, Javier, David, and there's a couple more. And
Any new faces?
yeah, no new faces. All new to this meeting, but not new to each other. So for other, I guess, meeting subteam syncs, the kind of standing items are status updates and release planning. I do wonder how that fits in with what we're doing, whether or not we want to align with something like that or do something completely different, given, the way that we work on this particular subteam.
Yeah, I think it's probably good to be in, like, we have a essentially continuous release flow. And it's probably good just to be explicit about that. We don't like bundle up a bunch of changes and then ship them to the website or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's probably good to be explicit about that, just because that might not be obvious for some things, like potentially, like as we do add registry stuff or something. I could imagine that. I don't think it would need to change. You just need to be aware of it.
So I am curious, right now, this learning subteam, what all is it responsible for? Because I feel like I have an idea, but I don't know if it's really encompassing everything that we should be taking care of.
Let me pull up the doc and see if it's remotely accurate. So according to the governance plan, which I shall link here, we own docs, the docs repository, the resources repository, and the samples repository.
What's the resources repository?
I just looked at this recently. What is it?
2 years
Oh
ago.
yeah, it's like this. Yeah, it was like a place where you put a bunch of links. I think before we had like a website.
Do we want to continue keeping that up to date? I'm not entirely sure what.
Yeah,
Can we retire that?
I think so. And like I was thinking at first, I was thinking, well, maybe there's some things that we'd want to leave here, like V2 build pack links. But honestly, if it belongs here, it probably is worth documenting at this point. Yeah.
I'll make an issue on the docs website, the docs repo, to like port anything relevant from resources, maybe.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, because there's a lot of outdated stuff here too, like the Docker images. It's like pointing to an RPax user.
Yeah, let's kill this thing.
All right, putting that on the agenda.
Yeah, actually, that I stumbled on that. We use the Buildpacks IO namespace, right, for Docker Hub.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Buildpacks Forge. That's old.
Yeah. I
Oh,
wonder
that
if we'll
sounds
land
like
on a little golden breadcrumb or something. Be awesome.
that sounds like Steven's old thing.
Cool. So we've got docs, we've got resources that we're gonna kill, and then samples. The registry related stuff, I know I'm playing with that a little bit with Travis. That's not going to fall under learning, is
No.
it?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, but if we, well, I don't think so. No, just because it's part of the website doesn't mean it's part of learning. Yeah, you're thinking specifically about the search web interface, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I suppose we own like the entry point to it. If it's on the website, like if there is a search button or link or tab or whatever, like we own that. But as far as it goes from there, it's just, you know, redirecting or whatever to the search web UI, and that we don't own.
Yeah, and that'll be completely isolated. Yeah. Cool.
Just that reminded me of a bad search experience I had on another open source thing. So I'm gonna link to that on our issue. Make sure that we have a better search box.
Something that's not captured here that we do own is the blog.
Hmm.
And
Point.
even though it's not a source code repository, I wonder if it should be included in that governance doc. Oh,
Go for it.
oh, come on. I can't copy paste into this doc.
Of course you can. Are you on a Windows machine?
No, I wish. Yeah, I think we should just include it in there
I
as
agree.
something we own, even though it's not a repo. So I'll do that. I have a note. I also need to add a link to the docs from the spec. So we've talked about how people get in this like GitHub loop where they're looking at code and looking at the spec and they really just want the docs. So we'd agreed in some meeting to add to the very beginning of the README in the spec, a sort of like, you probably don't want to be here kind of link.
Okay. Like you don't want to be here. That's funny.
I mean,
Make
like
sure you don't make a comment though.
90+%.
Yeah, we were talking with someone for the presentation. They're like, yeah, I read more spec than I ever thought I was going to.
I don't think they need to, right? It's just because they end up there, right? Our docs are good.
Especially if people comment and tell us what we can add. It's even better. We should also probably do some discussion on relevant issues or prioritizations in the learning and the docs issues. I don't know if prioritization makes sense, but we should at least figure out, God, this is something we should really get to sooner rather than later.
All right. So let's have that meta discussion. But before we get there, should we assign these action items? So like kill resources, I believe, David, you volunteered for that.
I don't know how to do that. I was going to make an issue on the docs, but if there's not really any relevant information on it, then that's probably just like an admin thing to archive it.
Yeah, I'll do. How about if you don't mind just taking a look at it to make sure that there's
Sure.
nothing that looks important there, I'll archive it. Just let me know when you've had a look over each of the links.
Yeah, maybe you could
Okay.
let Joe know when you're done and it could be archived.
And then I was already planning to do the other two, so I don't mind doing them unless somebody wants to pick them off.
Cool.
Hey, Natalie.
Sorry, I was late.
You're all good. We're going through and trying to figure out what it is that we do in the learning subteam.
I don't know if you can see former things in the chat, but we're using this same basic document, the subteam sync document.
You could share it again. That would
Yeah,
be.
I'm posting it. Oh. quick finger, David. All right. Um, cool. Okay, so then let's talk maybe meta about some of the prioritization. So I think in every other, like maybe subteam or repo, right? Like we're really talking about pack and lifecycle. Like each one of those repos has a certain cadence or release strategy that makes sense. I think because and from that you could talk about like milestones, right? Because there is something that you kind of batch up and release. For the learning, and when we talk about specifically the website, right? I feel like that's the primary repository to talk about. That isn't a thing, right? And so then we just have a list of issues. And I think, David, your question is how do we go about prioritizing some of that? I know in the past I created milestones for things that were somewhat relevant, right? So things like questions that came out of KubeCon, right? I kind of put a milestone around it. Other things, I forgot what other milestones there might have been, like pack release potentially, create a milestone for that. But it never felt quite as organized as any of the other release processes. So yeah, I don't know exactly what to do there, but maybe we can have a discussion around that.
One thing I've been wondering about, which I feel that other projects, like Docker, for example, will give you like versioned docs so that if I haven't updated to the latest API, I can still get the information that's relevant to me, right? Is that something that we are considering?
In my experience with doing that, especially on like tools that are meant to kind of gather information like Confluence, like versioning docs or associating docs to any particular version is like really hard, because there's a lot of replication and then there's like only small snippets that actually change, right? So like managing all that, like I could see has a lot of overhead unless we want to like very specifically target and minimize, like, okay, we're documenting the different versions of the spec, right? Like we're kind of doing this already for migration guides. We have a migration guide of 03 to 04, 04 to 05, and that like makes sense, right? Like it's very specific. But then to be able to say like this is how you do it for, pack 013.0, and then this is how you do it on pack 014.0, that seems very strenuous.
Yeah.
It's also, I feel like before GA, it wouldn't necessarily be something that I think would be the most important. Like I know when I, let's say, like look through like GitHub Docs and like they have, I try and like, Google sends me to the wrong version every time. It sends me to the enterprise server, not enterprise server or whatever, or what have you. It's always a bit of a annoyance to get to where I actually want to. So I would probably vote against it. But with having some, as you said, and you posted some like explicit materials on migration.
Yeah, I
And
think.
oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just add that there are places in our docs that are very tied to the particular API. So like we have a platform API section, obviously, but then there are other places where we, I don't know, is that okay? Or do we want to try to remove some of the specificity that's tying us to a particular API version?
So there's two things that come to mind, right? One of them is I think it would be beneficial that when we look at a very specific guide, tutorial, or whatever document, right, that we know what APIs we're talking about, right, or referencing, or maybe when they were introduced is a better term of saying it, right? And so you could envision sort of like labels, right, where it says like this guide uses Buildpacks API 05 and Platform API 06 or whatever, right? That could be a thing. And then maybe to ease or help with that is I know like, in the past we've talked about or been wanting to batch changes. So we anticipate that there's going to be a new release of the lifecycle with the latest version of the API. So we know that we're going to have to like document some of these new features or changes. So we start creating the docs for it, but then it becomes like a coordination hassle to be like, okay, like, let's ship lifecycle and then release this right away, right? So I think we've never like formalized that process. So I wonder if because the lifecycle and pack have very specific release cadences or strategies, whether the docs website could kind of figure out a way to work with them, right? So that we do have some sort of batched releases. But I don't know. I feel like that kind of goes against what Joe was saying earlier, like keeping that fluid, continuous delivery model. But maybe we could have both.
So in the implementation team, like the sub team syncs that we've had, we've talked about bringing some docs issues into the milestone for the next life cycle so that, at a minimum number of stories might get completed before that ships. But that's kind of looking at it from the reverse angle, right?
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? So you're saying you will create issues in the lifecycle repo that say like document this on the website?
I don't know if we will go so far as to actually create issues on the life cycle, but just as part of our work, we're trying to get, at least that's my hope, right? That like we consider part of our software delivery, like the actual documentation of said features.
Yeah, I
But then that
wonder.
kind of, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. No, I was gonna say like so the spec has a very specific branching strategy. I do wonder, right, to kind of try to satisfy both, wanting to release continuously, but also at the same time like batch changes, whether something like release branches that are almost in parallel for the next upcoming API changes or pack release or lifecycle release would work, right? So you could foresee that main could continuously get updates, but then we have a set of documents in lifecycle slash, oh, I don't know what version y'all are at right now, 10, 12, whatever, right?
Will
So
be 10.
there's 10. So there's a release branch with that, and then that's where the lifecycle, or implementation team is creating docs around that, right? Or our team as well. And then once the lifecycle releases, then we essentially just create a PR that merges all those changes into the main branch and deploys that.
I would be in favor of something like that, but at the same time, personally, I feel that our biggest problem right now is the lack of documentation at all of many things that I almost feel like that would be a higher priority than figuring out like how to batch stuff.
But is the problem with documentation that we're trying to backfill documentation, or is it that we're, let's say, delivering the software without considering the documentation and only thinking about it after the fact? If
Probably
you were to
both.
say that, I'm going to take pack, for instance, right? If we were to say like, hey, we really want to ship this documentation alongside with this next pack release, right? And then kind of make that a a goal or strategy that we use, then I could see both of these going in, and then you'd have the documentation that we say that we lack, right? So it's kind of like more strictly adhering to a process than we have in the past.
That's fair.
That's
So
the
I
only
bring
thing
up-
I could come up with right now. Go
Oh,
for it.
I see that we're running low on time, and I know I missed the whole first half of the meeting, but I just want to bring up one other thought regarding what this team is about, and just see if anyone also thinks this way. Like this is echoing something that came up in our like CMD contributors at VMware Retro yesterday, which is learning about our users as well as helping people learn about the project. Is there any scope for that in this team?
So are we saying like being able to create surveys or reaching out to users and gather data? Is that kind of what you have in mind? I don't know.
Yeah.
Joe, what do you think about that?
I mean, I guess if we have the bandwidth. I also don't know if I'd want it to be an exclusive responsibility of this team, because I wouldn't want that to be something that other sub teams or maintainers or whatever of the lifecycle or pack defer, because the learning team's got that. It just seems like a bad pattern. So maybe it's something we facilitate, don't necessarily do all the work or something.
Also, I know like in, I guess, Pivotal or VMware more, I think having designers, drive that effort can help, them, I guess, ascertain exactly what's necessary to pick information to pick up. I don't know if that should be it's definitely something that I guess in general we probably should do more. I don't know, as you were saying, whether it should be our exclusive responsibility.
But I think the same thing could be said of the docs too, right? Like, I don't think it's healthy for the learning team to be responsible for all docs, right? There should be some back and forth there too. And, maybe that was already discussed, so.
Yeah, maybe the term facilitation really is what makes sense here, right? Is we could figure out how to do it, maybe strategize on how to reach the right people that we want to ask about this, but then definitely not come up with the questions we want to ask and all that stuff, right? I think we need to gather that information from the rest of the community or the project.
That could be a good thing on our agenda item, meaning like, oh, who or what is someone we can reach out to, like as a recurring item, like who can we reach out to for pack or for feedback.
What do you mean? Like, so you're saying reoccurring item every single week we would try to reach out to somebody? Is that?
Or brainstorm on someone we can reach out to.
I don't know. I guess when we're talking about like your use of research, I was thinking more in lines of like creating a survey and then like just spreading it as far and wide as we can to try to get the very specific groups that we want in here, which I would assume are developers for certain scenarios or cases.
It can be.
then,
I mean, like I think there's lots of different things that are not mutually exclusive. Like broad surveys. We could do, I know Terrence and I have done this with some of the like Heroku customers using Buildpacks, where we set up a dedicated like hour, show us what you're doing and how you're doing it, a little bit more focused on that single customer user. So yeah, I think there's a bunch of different activities, and maybe what David's suggesting is like make a point of discussing whether we need to have any of those coming up. And then, you know, in the sense of facilitating, like let's say there's a customer user, trying to think of a good example. Let's say like GitLab or somebody, or I'm trying to think of more like a Buildpack users and authors example, but like we could make sure that someone from Pack is there and someone representing implementation team is there and someone from distribution team to, you know, facilitate it, but make sure that the various sub teams are still representing themselves and not relying on us to do it for them. Even though I think all the teams I just mentioned, it's us here. So we have enough for like cross-pollination right now that it may not matter.
We probably need someone from the core team also.
Maybe
Yeah,
we
I
should
feel
just
like
create a team that doesn't have anybody else on it from any other teams. We'll just call it something weird.
yeah, I think from my perspective, the one that seems harder to get at and is very valuable is like the app developer perspective, right? Because a lot of
Yeah.
us here, we're like in the weeds, we're inside it, and so it's kind of weird to get the perspective of somebody that just comes into it and is actually trying to do something with it.
That could also help us understand what it is we need to better document, right? Because like there's a very long list, I think, of things that we would like to add, but what would be the most valuable, I'm not entirely sure.
Cool. So I know we're at time, so I wonder if the one action item out of this at least is to put in, you know, a standing item, at least for now, to strategize on what it is the first thing that we want to do as far as that user research point is, whether we want to do focus group or survey, right? And then kind of take it from there, brainstorm on that. Cool, cool. Anything else before we drop off? All right, awesome. Thank you all. This was awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.